The rejected Omega brushed the old Moonstone. It blazed silver, and the Alpha King dropped to his. The forest of Erendor had always been a place of quiet whispers. Moonlight poured through the twisted branches, scattering silver across the soft moss and tangled roots. In this forgotten corner of the kingdom, abandoned ruins stretched toward the sky, stones worn by time and magic alike. Among them moved Lysara, the rejected Omega of a house long erased from the annals of nobility. Her boots pressed lightly against the damp earth, and her cloak rustled like a sigh as she moved deeper into the shadows. She had always been told that she did not belong. Her family, once proud, had fallen when dark accusations had branded their bloodline cursed. Since then, Lysara had learned to live in silence, to walk unseen, and to trust no one but herself. Still, despite the harsh lessons of exile, she could not suppress the pull that drew her to the ruins of the old temple. Something hummed beneath the stones, something ancient and alive. The heart of the temple was a clearing encircled by crumbling pillars, each engraved with symbols Lysara could not decipher. At the center sat a stone pedestal, and atop it rested a relic that seemed older than the world itself, the old Moonstone. It was a simple rock at first glance, smooth and pale, but beneath its surface, silver veins shimmered faintly. Her hand hesitated before reaching out, though the air around her crackled with invisible energy, urging her forward. When her fingers brushed against it, the world seemed to shiver. A rush of cold fire shot up her arm, silver light bursting from the Moonstone, as if the moon itself had come alive in her hands. Leaves trembled in the trees, and distant animals fled in panic. Lysara stumbled back, heart racing, but the light did not fade. It poured over her, reflecting every unspoken sorrow, every wound she had carried since her family's fall. And then she heard it, a voice, low and resonant, carried on the wind. The rejected shall awaken what kings cannot hold. Her breath caught. She wanted to pull away, to flee into the comforting darkness of the forest, but the Moonstone's pull was irresistible. Its light seemed to recognize her, as if it had been waiting for a hand that could awaken it. In that instant, Lysara felt something unfamiliar: power. True, undeniable power, yet it came with a tremor of fear. And then the ground shook beneath her boots. Leaves rustled violently, and from the shadows stepped a figure who commanded the forest itself to bow, tall, regal, clad in armor that gleamed even in the dim moonlight. Alpha King Valerian. His presence was like a storm contained within a man, dangerous, commanding, and impossible to ignore. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, his piercing eyes locking on her. Who dares awaken the Moonstone? His voice carried authority so absolute it made the leaves quiver. But beneath the controlled fury, Lysara saw something else: hesitation, confusion, fear. I didn't mean to," she stammered, retreating a step. But the Moonstone flared brighter, silver fire wrapping around her wrists like chains of light. "It called me," she whispered, the words trembling in the night air. "I only touched it." Valerian's gaze hardened. No mortal has stirred the Moonstone in centuries. "You," he stopped, his voice faltering for the briefest instant. He had faced armies, treacherous lords, and the darkest magic of Erendor, yet something about this moment unsettled him in a way he had never known. The silver blaze from the Moonstone intensified, stretching outward until it bathed the clearing in otherworldly light. Lysara's heart pounded. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if the trees themselves were waiting for what would come next. And then the first tremor of understanding struck her. The Moonstone was not just a relic. It was a mirror, reflecting her emotions, her pain, her longing. Valerian stepped closer, but Lysara did not shrink. Something within her, fierce and untamed, demanded acknowledgement. "I am Lysara," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I do not know why it chose me, but it did." He studied her, his sharp features shadowed by uncertainty. "You are human?" he asked, though even he seemed to doubt the simplicity of his words. No one human has this strength. No one mortal has ever touched the Moonstone and lived. I am more than what I appear, Lysara replied. The words startled even her. They felt true, yet heavy with unknown meaning. She did not yet know the depth of her own connection to the relic, nor the weight of the prophecy whispered by the wind. Valerian took another step forward, the moonlight catching the silver of his armor and reflecting it onto the forest floor. "Step back," he ordered, but there was a tremor in his voice. "Do not, do not force it again." Lysara did not move. The light of the Moonstone seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, drawing them together in a silent rhythm of power and tension. "I will not hurt you," she said softly, yet she felt the need to warn him. The relic had chosen her, and now it would not be ignored. For a moment the king's pride and authority wavered. He had faced countless threats to his throne, from traitorous dukes to dark magic that had haunted Erendor for generations. But none had stirred something within him as unsettling as this Omega with silver fire in her hands. The very air around her seemed to challenge his command, yet whispered to him in a language only his soul could feel. The Moonstone flared once more, blinding in its brilliance, and in that instant Valerian's knees buckled slightly. He caught himself on a crumbling pillar, yet the sight of a king brought low, even for a heartbeat, was enough to make Lysara's pulse quicken. There was awe in his gaze, but also fear, and beneath that fear, a flicker of something that made her uneasy yet curious. "You," he said, voice hoarse, as if he had just realized he could not control everything. "You could destroy me or save me, and I do not know which you will choose." Lysara's hands shook as she drew back, but the Moonstone's light seemed to pull her forward, urging her to understand that this was only the beginning. The forest had grown silent again, the echoes of the prophecy whispering through the leaves. The rejected shall claim the throne's shadow. Her heart ached with something unfamiliar: power, responsibility, and a strange, dangerous fascination with the king before her, a man whose authority had never been questioned, yet now faltered in ways that made her both afraid and emboldened. Valerian straightened, regaining the composure expected of a king, yet the faintest trace of uncertainty lingered in his eyes. He had faced monsters that bled darkness, armies that threatened to consume Erendor, and sorceries that could fracture souls. But this Omega with silver fire coursing through her veins was a force he had never imagined. "Come," he said finally, voice low and controlled, though Lysara could hear the tremor. "You will not remain here alone. The Moonstone, it will not forgive neglect. Neither will the kingdom if word spreads of your awakening." She followed him cautiously, every instinct on edge. She had lived her life avoiding kings and their courts, yet something within her insisted she trust this one. Not blindly, but with an awareness that the Moonstone had chosen her for a purpose, and perhaps the kingdom had chosen Valerian as well. The path to the castle was lined with shadows that seemed to lean closer as if curious. Lysara could feel the tension coiling between her and the king like a living thing. Neither spoke for a long while, yet the silence was electric. Each step brought them closer, yet the distance between them felt charged with unspoken warnings, forbidden fascination, and a stirring neither fully understood. Finally, they reached the gates of Erendor. The guards fell silent at the sight of the silver blaze, still faintly lingering around her wrists. Valerian's hand brushed the hilt of his sword, a reminder of the authority he wielded over life and death. Yet tonight, in the presence of the Moonstone's chosen, even his sword seemed powerless. He turned to her, gaze intense. "Tomorrow," he said, voice a mixture of command and caution, "you will explain to me everything you know of that relic. Every secret it whispered to you, every vision it gave, and you will stay under my protection until I am certain your awakening does not invite ruin." Lysara met his eyes, heart thundering. "I will stay," she said quietly, yet with resolve. "But I do not yet know if I am a threat or a savior." The king regarded her for a long moment, and then, Almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Neither of them knew what the dawn would bring, yet both sensed that the fragile balance of power in Erendor had shifted forever. As Lysara settled into the shadowed tower where she would spend the night, she felt the moonstone's warmth beneath her cloak. Its silver light pulsed against her chest, like a heartbeat syncing with her own. And in the quiet, whispered by the wind outside the high windows, came the prophecy again. The rejected shall claim the throne's shadow. She could not yet understand what it meant, but one thing was certain: the kingdom, the king, and the moonstone itself had chosen her. And in that choice lay a storm waiting to break. And as the first rays of dawn began to touch the silver spires of Erendor, Lysara knew that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The dawn crept slowly over the spires of Erendor, spilling gold and silver across the stone walls of the castle. Inside, Lysara watched through the tall, narrow windows, her fingers brushing the faint traces of silver fire that still clung to her skin from the moonstone. The air smelled of wet stone and smoke from the torches below. The castle was alive with whispers, the servants and guards murmuring about the Omega who had awakened the old relic. Her presence alone had shifted the balance of power, though few understood the extent of it. Valerian's chambers were not far. The king had not slept, pacing in the dark like a predator whose prey had transformed into something untouchable. Lysara could sense him even before she saw him, the pulse of authority, the quiet ripple of unease that followed him through the halls. Even the moonstone's silver glow did not compare to the tension radiating from him. When the summons came, Lysara found herself walking through corridors lined with banners that had once celebrated her family's fall. Every step reminded her that she was no longer merely a girl in exile. She was the focal point of an ancient power that the king himself feared. Guards bowed stiffly, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Even the court magisters, who had studied the Moonstone for decades, dared not speak her name aloud. In the council hall, Valerian waited. He stood before the high windows, silver light from the rising sun glinting off the intricate armor that marked his rank. His eyes, usually sharp and unreadable, flicked over her with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "You came willingly," he said, voice controlled but low, almost cautious. "Few have the courage to meet me after waking a relic that can destroy kingdoms." "I did not wake it to threaten," Lysara replied, steady but wary. "I did not even know I could touch it. It called to me, and when I felt it, it felt alive, like it had been waiting." Valerian's lips pressed into a thin line. "A relic does not call to anyone. Only those strong enough to wield it can awaken it." He turned to pace the hall, long strides echoing against the stone floors. "You are stronger than I expected." Lysara swallowed, unsure if that was a warning or a compliment. "Stronger than what?" she asked softly. "Than most mortals," Valerian said, stopping abruptly. He looked at her fully, then really looked, as if he were trying to measure her soul. "Even than kings." The words struck her like a cold wind. For all her life she had been told she was weak, rejected, unworthy. Yet here was the king, the Alpha King, admitting something she had never allowed herself to hope: that she was not ordinary, that she could matter. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick and fragile. Then Valerian spoke again. "The Moonstone has begun to respond to your emotions," he said, voice a mixture of curiosity and caution. "It reacts to your anger, your grief, your longing. That is dangerous. If you cannot control it, the entire kingdom could be at risk." Lysara's hands tightened at her sides. "I do not yet know how to control it," she admitted, "but I will learn. I must." He studied her, the light from the windows catching the faintest silver shimmer in his eyes. "Good," he said, though the word was heavy with implication. "Because learning will be necessary for both of us." The tension between them was palpable. Valerian's presence was a storm, commanding, overwhelming, yet strangely protective. Lysara felt herself drawn to him in ways she could not name. She had never known kindness, yet he carried it in subtle gestures. The tilt of his head, the measured restraint in his words, the way he did not raise his hand against her even when he could. "You will remain under my watch," he continued. "The court will not understand your awakening. They may fear it. They may try to exploit it. And the Moonstone, it does not forgive mistakes." Lysara bowed, the weight of her new responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. "I will obey," she said, though the word felt heavier than any chains she had known. Valerian nodded, then gestured toward a side door. "Come, I will show you the chambers where you will stay. There you may begin to understand your connection to the relic." The chambers were smaller than Lysara had expected, high-ceilinged and lined with bookshelves that smelled of old parchment and candle wax. A single table in the center held maps, scrolls, and the faint outline of protective wards. The Moonstone, placed carefully on a velvet cushion, glimmered faintly, as though it recognized her presence even here. "You may touch it only under supervision," Valerian said, his tone unyielding. "Do not awaken it further until I am certain you are ready. It is not a toy. It is a force older than this kingdom, older than your family's house. Respect it, or it will consume you." Lysara nodded, but her curiosity burned brighter than her caution. "I need to understand it," she said softly. "I cannot fear what I do not know." He paused as if debating whether to argue, then finally said, "Very well, but every lesson will be guided, and every mistake will carry consequences. Understand that." As the days passed, Lysara began her training with the Moonstone. The mornings were spent in meditation, learning to sense the currents of silver energy that responded to her emotions. The afternoons were spent with Valerian, studying the history of the ancient lineages, and the long-forgotten prophecies that spoke of an Omega rising to change the fate of kings. At first, Lysara struggled. Every surge of emotion, fear, anger, longing, caused bursts of light that threatened to overwhelm her. One evening, after losing control, she hid in the garden, trying to steady her breath. Valerian found her there, standing among the roses that bloomed even in the chill of early spring. "You cannot run from it," he said quietly, stepping beside her. "The Moonstone is not just a tool. It is part of you now. You must accept it." Lysara's eyes were bright with tears, frustration shining through her usual calm. "I am afraid," she admitted. "Afraid I will hurt someone, afraid I will fail, afraid that even you—" She stopped, unsure if she dared finish the thought. Valerian's hand brushed hers, a fleeting contact, and yet it sent a shock of warmth through her. "Afraid I will leave you," he suggested, his voice softer than it had ever been. "I am not a man who abandons what matters, not anymore." Something unspoken passed between them. Lysara felt the pull of the Moonstone in tandem with the pull in her chest. She realized, with a mixture of fear and longing, that her connection to the king was changing too, fragile, dangerous, yet impossible to ignore. But the court was not idle. Rumors spread like wildfire, whispers of the Omega who had awakened the Moonstone, of the king who trembled before her. Allies in the council eyed her with envy, enemies watched with predatory anticipation. Lysara and Valerian were both aware that their growing bond, delicate as moonlight, could be weaponized against them. Then, one night, the first test came. Shadows moved beyond the walls of the castle, dark and twisted shapes that carried whispers of forbidden magic. Lysara sensed the disturbance first, the Moonstone pulsing violently in her hands. Silver light danced across her fingertips, and instinctively she raised it, feeling the pulse of power surge through her. Valerian entered the chamber moments later, his presence commanding yet tense. "They are testing us," he said. "They wish to see if you are a threat to be destroyed or a tool to be controlled." Lysara's heart pounded, but she lifted her chin. "Then let them come," she said. "I will not hide." He studied her, the storm of his gaze softened by a hint of pride. "Good," he said, "because tonight your power will not be the only thing tested." The shadows gathered at the castle gates, strange shapes coalescing into forms that should not exist in the light of day. Magic flared from their fingers, curling like smoke and sparks. Lysara's silver energy rose to meet them, and in that moment she realized she was no longer merely the rejected Omega. She was a force to be reckoned with, feared, respected, and perhaps, finally, understood. Valerian stood beside her, the Alpha King and his fledgling Omega facing the encroaching darkness together. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, and Lysara felt something shift: trust, fear, longing, and the first flicker of something far deeper. The Moonstone blazed in her hands, brighter than ever, as though it sensed the coming storm. And as the first shadow stepped into the courtyard, Lysara understood that the path ahead would not be easy. Every step would test her, every emotion would challenge her, and every heartbeat would draw her closer to the king she did not yet fully understand. And in that moment, amidst silver fire and shadowed magic, Lysara knew that nothing would ever be the same again, not for her, not for Valerian, and perhaps not for the entire kingdom of Erendor. The castle of Erendor had never known a night as restless as this. Shadows twisted along the walls like living things, and the faint silver glow of the Moonstone lingered in Lysara's chambers long after midnight. Her hands trembled slightly, though the tremor was not fear alone. It was anticipation, the electric tension of power she barely understood yet could not ignore. Valerian had not left her side since the first attack. The Alpha King moved through the corridors like a living storm, his eyes sharp, commanding, yet softened by an unspoken worry. He did not just fear the enemies at the gates. He feared what the Moonstone revealed: the depth of Lysara's growing strength and the bond forming between them. "Your power is growing faster than I expected," he said quietly, stepping into the chamber as dawn's first light brushed the stone floor. His armor had been replaced by simpler garments for the night, yet the weight of his presence was unchanged. "The Moonstone is not only responding to you, it is shaping you, and the way it shapes you will change this kingdom, whether you wish it or not." Lysara met his gaze, silver light shimmering faintly across her wrists. "I do not yet know if I can control it," she admitted. "Sometimes I feel it moving inside me like a tide I cannot stop." Valerian nodded slowly, though his sharp eyes softened. "Control is not the same as understanding," he said. "You must learn both. Fear will bind you, trust will free you. Trust." The word lingered between them like a fragile promise. Lysara did not yet know if she could trust him fully. The king who commanded armies, who had crushed dissent without thought, who had every reason to see her as a threat. And yet, she sensed in him a depth beyond authority, a shadow of loneliness that mirrored her own. The morning was spent in silence, broken only by the rustle of parchments and the faint hum of magic from the Moonstone. Valerian watched her closely, his expression unreadable, but every so often his fingers would brush against the edge of a map, a scroll, or even the hilt of his sword, as if reminding himself that control was still his to wield. By mid-afternoon, a council had been called. The lords and ladies of Erendor, draped in silks and finery, gathered in the great hall. Whispers rippled like wind over fire as Lysara entered. Every pair of eyes was upon her, some in curiosity, some in envy, and some in suspicion. Even the magisters of the Moonstone, those who had studied it for decades, watched with measured fear. Valerian stood beside her, unyielding, his presence shielding her as much as asserting his authority. "This is your kingdom," he said, voice loud enough for the assembly to hear. "Every part of it, from the highest tower to the smallest garden, belongs to us all, and every choice we make will shape its future." The council murmured, unsettled by the sudden claim. Yet their unease was nothing compared to the shadow that crept along the edges of the hall. From the corner of her eye, Lysara saw the envy, the fear, and the first signs of betrayal that always followed power. She clenched her fists, feeling the pulse of the Moonstone. It throbbed with anticipation, sensing the fractures within the court as clearly as it sensed her own doubts. The meeting ended without resolution, the lords departing in murmured speculation. Lysara and Valerian remained, alone in the silent hall. He approached her, careful, deliberate, as though every step was a negotiation with fate itself. "You cannot be distracted by fear," he said. "The Moonstone will not forgive hesitation. You must let it guide you without letting it control you. Do you understand?" "I will try," she whispered. The words felt small, yet the conviction behind them was growing. She was tired of hiding, of being afraid, of feeling powerless. If she could master the Moonstone, she could protect the kingdom and perhaps herself as well. Days passed, each filled with lessons in magic, history, and the subtle dances of trust between them. Lysara began to see glimpses of Valerian's vulnerabilities. He did not speak often of his past, yet moments of silence betrayed him. The weight of responsibility, the guilt over battles lost, the loneliness that authority demanded. Slowly, she began to understand that his strength was tempered by fragility, and that he was as much a prisoner of the crown as she was a prisoner of exile. One evening, as they trained in the courtyard beneath the silver moon, the first serious test of their bond arrived. Dark magic crept along the forest edge, unseen by ordinary eyes, but Lysara felt it immediately, the Moonstone thrumming in response. Silver light poured from her hands as she stepped forward, standing beside Valerian. "They come for you," he said, voice low and tense. "They will not stop until they either control the Moonstone or destroy it." Her heart beat fast, yet she did not step back. "Then let them try," she said, the words carrying a confidence that surprised even her. The shadows advanced, dark shapes with no clear form, twisting and flickering like smoke. Magic flared from their fingers, curling toward the castle like black fire. Lysara raised her hands instinctively, silver flames leaping to meet them. Valerian moved beside her, sword drawn, every movement precise and commanding. It was chaos made manifest. Magic clashed against magic, light against shadow, the Moonstone's silver blaze illuminating the courtyard in a surreal glow. Lysara felt the power surge through her, the Moonstone responding not to thought but to emotion, fear, rage, longing, and a strange, unnameable connection to the king beside her. "Focus!" Valerian shouted over the roar of magic. "Control it or it will consume you." She closed her eyes briefly, drawing on every lesson, every moment of trust and understanding she had built. Slowly, the silver blaze solidified, forming a shield that deflected the dark energy of the attackers. Each pulse of light reflected her emotions, but it also reflected her bond with Valerian, the trust they were forming, unspoken yet undeniable. When the last shadow dissipated, Lysara sank to her knees, drained, yet exhilarated. Valerian knelt beside her, concern etched into his face. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she said, though her hand still trembled slightly. I think I understand a little more." He studied her for a long moment, the storm of his usual presence softened by something gentler. "You did well," he said quietly, "more than well. You controlled it, and in doing so, you changed something in me as well." Lysara looked at him, heart beating fast. There was a depth in his gaze she had not seen before, a mixture of pride, awe, and something else, something that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts spin. She wanted to ask what it was, to name it, to understand it. But the words died on her lips, leaving only the silver light of the Moonstone and the lingering tension between them. That night, as she rested in her chamber, the Moonstone's glow faded into a soft shimmer, yet she could not sleep. The attack had been only a warning, she realized. Whoever sent the shadows would return, stronger, more cunning. And the Moonstone, connected as it was to her emotions, would be both her shield and her weapon. Her thoughts turned to Valerian. The king had always been a figure of authority, untouchable, distant. But now, beside the Moonstone, he had been something else, vulnerable, human, yet commanding. The pull between them, subtle but undeniable, tugged at her chest. She wondered if it was the Moonstone influencing her, or if the king himself had awakened something in her that had been buried for years. The next morning brought a revelation that shook her even more. In the council chamber, scrolls detailing her family's past were laid before her. Secrets she had never known emerged. Her ancestors had once been protectors of the Moonstone, their fall orchestrated to hide its existence from enemies of the kingdom. Her exile had not been punishment alone, but a shield for something greater than herself. Valerian's gaze followed her as she read, his presence constant yet respectful. "You see now," he said softly, "you were never weak. The kingdom, the Moonstone, even we needed you. And perhaps you were never truly alone." Lysara's chest tightened. The weight of her past, the burden of her awakening, and the connection to the king beside her combined into a storm she could barely hold in check. She was no longer merely a rejected Omega. She was the key to the kingdom, the bearer of the Moonstone, and a partner to the Alpha King in ways she did not yet fully comprehend. The day ended with the first signs of unease among the court. Whispers of jealousy and fear began to spread. Some envied her power, others questioned Valerian's judgment. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows beyond the castle walls, a figure watched, patient, calculating, and aware that the Moonstone's awakening had shifted the balance of everything. As night fell again, Lysara stood at the balcony overlooking the silver-lit kingdom. Valerian approached silently, his hand brushing hers, a gesture small yet deliberate. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "will test both of us, our strength, our trust, and the bond between us. And the kingdom may not survive if we fail." She turned to him, eyes wide, heart pounding. "Then we must not fail." He nodded, the weight of command and something softer, something unspoken, resting in his gaze. "Together," he said. And as the moon rose high, the Moonstone pulsed faintly in her chamber, a reminder that power and destiny were not gifts lightly given. A storm approached, unseen, inevitable and hungry. And with it, the path forward for Lysara and Valerian would demand everything they had: courage, trust, and a bond that neither fully understood but could no longer deny. The kingdom of Erendor held its breath beneath the silvered glow of the full moon. Shadows still lingered at the edges of the forests, and the wind carried whispers of unseen dangers. But tonight, the castle stood firm, a silent sentinel against the chaos that threatened to consume everything. Lysara stood in the high tower, the Moonstone resting in her hands. Its glow was steady now, no longer wild or chaotic. She had learned to channel its power through calm, through focus, through understanding her own heart. Every pulse of silver energy resonated with her emotions, her fear, her courage, her grief, and her hope. She could feel the kingdom in her veins, its past, its pain, and its future, and with that understanding, she finally felt strong. Valerian approached quietly, his presence a constant and grounding force beside her. The Alpha King had grown restless in the weeks since the last attack, but he no longer carried the same uncertainty that had shadowed him at first. Instead, he moved with purpose, tempered by respect and an unspoken acknowledgement of Lysara's strength. "You have done well," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "Not many could have mastered it as you have." Lysara looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the Moonstone's silver light. "It is not just me," she said. "It is the Moonstone and you. Your trust helped me control it." Valerian's expression softened. "Perhaps," he said, "but it is your courage that shaped it. Your willingness to face what others would fear is what saved the kingdom. And perhaps in doing so, you saved me as well." The words hung between them, heavier than any sword, warmer than any fire. Lysara's heart ached in a way she did not fully understand, a mixture of longing, gratitude, and a growing affection she had fought to deny. Their moment was interrupted by a distant roar. Lysara's eyes narrowed, and the Moonstone's glow flared in response, sensing danger. Shadows were moving in the forest beyond the castle walls, darker and more deliberate than before. Whoever had attacked previously was returning, stronger, more cunning. Valerian drew his sword, its blade catching the silver moonlight. "They have learned," he said, voice tight with tension, "and now they wish to see if the last test succeeded." Lysara took a deep breath, feeling the moonstone thrumming in her hands. "Then we must be ready," she said firmly. "Together." The enemy came with a force unlike any before, sorcerers who wielded dark, twisted magic, accompanied by beasts that moved like smoke and shadow. The castle gates trembled under the assault, but Lysara and Valerian stood together in the courtyard, the moonstone glowing between them like a star brought to earth. "Focus on me," Valerian said, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Your emotions will guide the moonstone, but you must let me help anchor your power." Lysara nodded, closing her eyes. She let herself feel everything: fear, determination, anger, hope, and let the moonstone absorb it all. The silver light surged outward, forming a protective barrier around the castle, repelling dark magic and scattering the shadowy beasts. The sorcerers recoiled, their dark energies no match for the combined force of the Omega and the King. Valerian moved with precision, his sword cutting through the chaos, but it was Lysara's light that truly held the line. She could feel the bond between them strengthening with each pulse of magic. Trust, respect, and an unspoken connection guided them, allowing them to move as one against the darkness. But just as victory seemed within reach, a dark figure stepped forward, cloaked in shadows, eyes glowing with malevolence. This was no ordinary enemy. This was the one who had orchestrated the attacks, who had sought to seize the Moonstone for their own power. "You think your light can protect you," the figure hissed, voice like ice. "You are nothing without fear, nothing without weakness." Lysara felt the Moonstone pulse violently, warning her of the danger. She stepped forward, her silver energy flaring like a beacon. "I am not nothing," she said, voice strong, unwavering. "I am Lysara, and I will not let you harm this kingdom or anyone in it." The figure laughed, a sound that sent chills through the courtyard. "Then you will fall as all who dare oppose me fall." Valerian stepped beside her, sword raised. "Not tonight," he said, his voice steady. "We stand together." The battle that followed was like a storm made flesh. Dark magic clashed with silver fire, and every strike tested the limits of Lysara's control. Yet through the chaos, she felt something she had never felt before: clarity. The Moonstone was not just a weapon, it was a part of her, a reflection of her heart, her courage, and her bond with Valerian. At the height of the battle, Lysara and Valerian fought in perfect unison. Their movements synchronized without words, each anticipating the other's action. It was not just magic or strength that defeated the enemy. It was trust, and the unspoken bond that had grown between them through days of shared fear, lessons, and quiet moments. Finally, with one last surge of silver energy, Lysara channeled the Moonstone fully. The dark figure screamed, shadows unraveling in the brilliance of the light, and the remaining sorcerers fled into the night. The courtyard was silent, save for the crackling of dissipating energy and the labored breathing of those who had fought. Lysara sank to her knees, exhausted, the Moonstone's glow fading into a gentle shimmer. Valerian knelt beside her, his armor scorched, hair disheveled, yet his eyes were calm, steady, and full of something he had never shown her before: relief, admiration, and perhaps love. "You have done it," he said softly. "The kingdom is safe. And you have proven yourself beyond any doubt." Lysara looked at him, the silver light of the Moonstone reflecting in her eyes. "I could not have done it alone," she said. "You helped me. You trusted me." He reached for her hand, brushing his fingers against hers. "And I will continue to trust you," he said, voice low. "Not because you wield the Moonstone, but because you are remarkable, because you are you." For a moment, silence wrapped around them like a cloak. The weight of battles fought, lessons learned, and power understood hung between them. Lysara felt the full weight of her journey: the rejection, the exile, the fear, and the discovery of her own strength. And in that moment, she understood something she had never allowed herself to hope. She was no longer alone. The next day, the council met again, but this time the tone had changed. The lords and ladies who had once whispered in fear and envy bowed with respect. The magisters acknowledged her mastery of the Moonstone, and even those who had doubted Valerian's judgment now saw the wisdom in their partnership. Valerian addressed the council, standing tall beside Lysara. This kingdom is protected not by a single king, but by the courage, wisdom, and strength of those who serve it, he said, his gaze sweeping over the room before settling on her. And today, it has been proven that even the most unexpected of allies can change the course of history. Lysara felt warmth flood her chest at his words. Pride, relief, and something deeper, unspoken, stirred within her. She had been rejected, cast aside, and feared as a curse. Yet here she was, standing at the side of a king, recognized not for her bloodline, but for her courage, her power, and her heart. As the council dispersed, Valerian turned to her, a small smile breaking the usual stern line of his mouth. "Come," he said, "let us walk. The kingdom is at peace tonight, and it is time we see it as it should be seen." They walked together across the castle terraces, the silver moonlight bathing them in quiet calm. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of blooming gardens and distant forests. For the first time, Lysara felt the full breadth of possibility, safety, power, and a bond that was neither forced nor feared, but chosen. "You have changed everything," Valerian said quietly. "Not just the Moonstone, not just the kingdom, but me." Lysara looked at him, heart quickening. "And you have changed me," she said. "Not through power, but through trust, through presence, through belief in me when I could not believe in myself." He took her hand in both of his, holding it carefully, reverently. "Then let us face the future together," he said. "Whatever comes, we will stand as one, not as king and omega, not as ruler and subject, but as equals, as partners." Tears pricked at her eyes, but they were not of sorrow. They were of triumph, of relief, and of the first stirrings of love that had grown through fear, danger, and shared struggle. The Moonstone pulsed faintly in her hands, no longer wild, no longer uncertain. Its silver light now symbolized hope, renewal, and the bond between them. Lysara understood at last that her power was not a curse, but a gift, one that she could use to protect, to heal, and to guide. And as they stood together looking out over the kingdom, shadows still lingered at the edges of the forests, but neither of them feared them. They knew that whatever darkness approached, they would face it as one, strengthened by trust, courage, and the unspoken bond forged in the trials of the Moonstone. The moon shone high over Erendor, casting silver light across the castle spires. Lysara and Valerian stood side by side on the highest balcony, the wind teasing their hair, the world stretched out below them. A new chapter had begun, one of hope, of courage, and of a connection that no shadow could break. The kingdom slept, safe beneath the silver blaze of the Moonstone. And for the first time in her life, Lysara knew she was home, not in walls of stone, not in titles or bloodlines, but in the strength, trust, and love that she and the Alpha King now shared.